So Mark Carney, for many people that voted for him, was elected as a savior. He was supposed to save us from the menace that is Donald Trump south of the border. The trade war, the tariffs, that is really a massive threat for the Canadian economy. And this is the context in which he's been prime minister for over 6 months, and he's put forward his first budget just this past Tuesday, November 4th. So I'm joined by Marco Lagrada from the Revolutionary Communist Party Executive Committee, and we're going to discuss what this budget is, what's in it, what it represents, and what is the Marxist analysis of this budget. So yeah, I don't know. Do you want to just start us off here? What's in this budget to begin with?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of things. I mean, I think big picture. I saw some people online calling this the austerity and war budget. Mm-hmm. I think Yves Engler's a candidate for the NDP. I think he was calling it that. I think that's entirely accurate because obviously there's lots of little things, but big picture, there's cuts, especially to the federal workforce, which we can go into. But I think the big spending item is a whole lot of money for the army, which, no one should be surprised about. They've been talking about this for months. I think the big figure was just north of $80 billion over 5 years that they're plowing into the army. Just to kind of put this into perspective, there was an article in the Globe and Mail which was comparing the language of this budget to Justin Trudeau's first budget and counting how many times they use the word defense. And in Trudeau's first budget, which was I think in 2015, it mentioned defense 20 times. This budget mentions defense 150 times. Mm-hmm. So it gives you a sense of what they're trying to do here. This is a significant expansion for the army. Probably an underestimate. I think this is just the beginning of what they're going to spend on the army. It doesn't include the submarines. They've been shopping around. Carney was in South Korea getting a tour of these subs that they might be buying. They're still in negotiations. But the budget doesn't include that, which will be a significant amount of money. It's not clear if it meets the NATO target. They said they'd reach 5% of GDP in terms of military spending. They've been very coy about that. It's not clear if it's going to meet that. Anyway, it seems like there's a lot more money to come. So $80 billion is not anything to bat your eye at. That's a lot of money. But I think there's more coming. And why this is happening is because of Trump, I would say. Trump said from the beginning that Canada doesn't have an army, is what he said, that they need to spend more on their defense, that they shouldn't be freeloading off the United States. Carney buckled to that. And this is what it looks like in dollars and cents. So I would say this is the big thing. This is a wartime budget. Yeah. This is a military budget. They called
it a wartime budget.
Oh, did they?
Yeah. Melanie Joly said that.
At least they're being honest.
They're not at war. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah. But I would think that's the biggest thing. Obviously, there's more things, but I would say that's the number one.
Yeah. So this is Carney's. This is his big, beautiful budget, I guess you could say. He's in many ways mimicking Trump. He's capitulating to him. We'll talk about that in a bit. We talked about that before. This military spending is a huge... It's because of Trump. And actually, I wanted to add onto that, he was not elected on that. What did he say when he was running? He didn't say the 5% when he was running. Mm-hmm. But he's going right ahead with it. Mm-hmm. So much for democracy. Mm-hmm. But yeah, he was not elected to spend this amount of money on the military. Mm-hmm. And he's going ahead with it anyway. This is something that we've noted was demanded by corporate Canada last year. Mm-hmm. And he is going ahead with it, which is what corporate Canada want, which is what Trump wants, which is what Western imperialism wants, which he was not elected on, because if he ran on it, the chance of him getting elected were far lower. But Yeah, he's going ahead with it anyway. But yeah, there's some other things in there. Maybe we'll talk about that a little later. But I guess the big question is, yeah, so it's 82 billion in military spending. In general, it's a massive increase in military spending. The deficit is going, or it's not just military spending, spending in general. The government is going through the roof. The deficit is increasing to the highest level it's been outside of COVID, I believe, to 78 billion. And I saw a number said it was 141 billion in spending over 5 years, new spending. And so yes, this is a huge amount that the government's taking on. There was all this talk over the past couple of years that Trudeau's run the deficit up too much. The debt doubled under Trudeau. The debt to GDP ratio's gone up. Obviously, the big bourgeois don't like that. They're worried that it's becoming unsustainable. And here we have it going up even further in drastic fashion. So I guess the question here is, who's going to pay for this? So we do have some indications of who's going to pay. You're not going to like it if you're thinking it's not going to be you. So yeah, I don't know. Who's paying for this?
Yeah, well, this comes to the other half of that, austerity and war budget. We talked about war. What about the austerity? And I would say, there's quite significant attacks that this budget lays out, mainly against the federal workforce. So they're cutting or plan to cut 10% of the federal workforce. I think that works out to about, 40,000 workers over that period in many departments. Just to put that into perspective, when Harper was in power, Stephen Harper was a conservative. He cut about the same level from the federal workforce, about 10% when he was in power. So, some people have said, this is a conservative budget. It really is a Harper budget in that sense, in terms of they're cutting the same amount. And this is going to have consequences. Like we were talking the other day about, you've had this total crisis at the CRA. There was this report that came out from the Auditor General where essentially they were saying that, listen, people are waiting forever to talk to an agent. And apparently when they finally got a hold of an agent, they were only getting the correct answer to their question. Something ridiculous like 15 or 20% of the time. In other words, just a total failure on the part of the CRA. The reason why that's happening is because they've made cuts to the CRA in the last period. Massive cuts, massive layoffs. And what Carney's promising is a whole hell of a lot more of that, not just at the CRA, but at a number of federal departments. That's going to impact our services. Maybe not, won't necessarily be cuts to people directly, but it'll be a loss of good union jobs. They're preparing a hell of a fight with the federal workers union. They came out after the budget came out and called it for what it was, a massive attack on workers, on trade union members. So they're probably going to have a hell of a fight with them in the next period. But this is an attack on workers more generally. It's an attack on our services. It's a significant cut. And all told, that adds up to, I can't remember the exact figure, but they're expecting to save something like $50-60 billion from these cuts to the federal workforce and other places. All of that's going to the military. Military, like we said, it's about 80 billion. So this is where the money's coming from. It's not coming from nowhere. It's coming from our services. It's coming at the expense of layoffs and attacks. So there's the austerity.
Yeah, so on the backs of a cost of living crisis, on the backs of increasing inequality, actually I just saw a study the other day from Statistics Canada that showed inequality in Canada is at record high levels, and it keeps increasing. On the backs of a massive debt crisis where most families are in debt and are having trouble paying the bills, this is what this government is doing. As we talked about in the beginning, the first issue of our paper, Communist Revolution, that talked about the election of Mark Carney was called Victory for the Billionaires. And it is. They're not going to the rich who have been getting richer and finding the wealth needed to solve the problems in our society. They're coming to working class people, and they're cutting union jobs to do it. There's a lot of other things, little things. They're cutting like tree planting program. They're cutting federal money for public transportation for cities. They're cutting lots of little funding to different things across the board. But the big one is the attack on the federal service, federal public sector workers. So yeah, that's how they're going to pay for it. They're giving the money to the military, mainly. Military, corporate Canada, etc. And they are taking it from working class people. So I guess that leads to another question. So the ruling class in Canada, if you read what they say, the big CEOs and their analysis, the big banks, you'd imagine they'd be probably happy because they've been calling for cuts like this for a while. And this is, all things considered, like you said, this is similar to what Stephen Harper did. Although I would add, Stephen Harper was conservative, and many people, I remember, I grew up in the Stephen Harper era politically, and many people thought, oh, he's the worst. He's like a fascist. He's so right-wing. Stephen Harper never increased the military. I believe he actually cut military spending. So this is a massive attack on the same level of that Stephen Harper, while also a massive increase in military spending. So, yeah, I would say this is a more reactionary budget than the Stephen Harper budgets. Definitely more reactionary. You'd have to go back as far as the Chrétien Martin governments in the 90s. But even them, they didn't increase military spending. They cut it. So,
And I guess just on that point, because, yeah, it's entirely right. Harper never increased military spending anywhere close to what Carney's doing.
Yeah.
It really blows him out of the water. Yeah. And Chrétien, too, I would add. Chrétien cut just about everything. But the army, he actually cut the army as well when Chrétien was in power. So in certain ways, what Carney's doing is worse than even that.
Yeah.
But there's also, I guess one thing we missed is there's a lot of little, you call them Easter eggs in the budget, sort of these really reactionary proposals that were kind of just mentioned offhand in the budget. One of them was they're going to investigate privatizing airports.
Yep.
Which would be a huge attack, would be a huge mistake. Actually, this does harken back to Chrétien, because when Chrétien was in power, they were privatizing everything. And we're still feeling the consequences of that, privatizing the railways, privatizing the airlines. That's how we got Air Canada, which is a total mess. Now they want to do the same thing to the airports. The other thing, we were discussing it earlier, they want to change collective bargaining. Now, they haven't said what they're going to do to collective bargaining. You can maybe venture a guess, but the way it was described in their statement was that, they're going to pass legislation to change collective bargaining such that it takes into account, they said, the fiscal circumstances of Canada. We know what that means. We know what that means. That means they're going to make it harder for workers to strike. They're going to make it easier to take away the right to strike. They're preparing themselves. Carney's not an idiot. He knows that there's going to be a backlash to some of these measures on the trade union front. And he's preparing himself for a hell of a fight in the next period. It's things like that, It's a warning to the labor movement. All these people who said it was, the lesser evil, and people talked about harm reduction. We had to vote for the Liberals to stop the Conservatives. This guy is preparing to go to war with the workers, and it's built into the budget. You see it. It's kind of glimpses into the future. This is what's coming. So yes, in many ways, it leaves Harper behind in the dust. This guy's even worse.
Yeah, so there's lots of things in there that are not necessarily something that they're doing now, but that they're opening the door to. Quite reactionary things, which I didn't see many people even on the left pick up on some of this stuff, but it's in there. But yeah, back to one thing that I was saying was about the ruling class. They must be very happy about this budget because it's many ways he's their man and this is their budget. He's doing things that they've been demanding for a long time. They were pressuring Justin Trudeau to do many of these things, and for political reasons, for opportunist reasons, he refused to. But now they got their guy there and he's doing it. So they must be happy. No?
No.
Okay.
Well, I think, I was reading a lot of articles, statements from, the statement of the Business Council of Canada, which, if you like, it's kind of like the, central leadership of the capitalists in Canada. And they issued a statement, a number of others issued a statement, and they all more or less said the same thing. It was sort of, this is a fine start, but you got to go further than this.
Yeah.
Sort of, is that all you got? It's not enough. It's not enough in terms of tax handouts for the rich, for the big companies. Not enough in terms of subsidies. And really, at the end of the day, it's not enough in terms of austerity, because also they're not happy about the debt.
Yeah.
I would say the big bourgeois, listen, he's running a deficit north of 70 billion. What did you say?
78 billion.
78 billion. It's almost 80 billion. That's bigger than Trudeau's deficits outside of the pandemic. Pandemic was an exceptional period. But he's racking up the debt. They're not crazy about that, because all of that debt creates an unstable business environment for the ruling class. They're worried about getting loans. They're worried about Canada having a credit downgrade, and so on and so forth. They never say it openly, but how they want these things paid for, the army included, is cuts to healthcare, is cuts to OAS, is cuts to childcare benefits, cuts to EI, all of which Chrétien did, by the way. He was, the loyal servant of the
remember that.
ruling
It was horrible.
class. Yeah, we're still feeling it.
Yeah.
It wasn't enough from their perspective, which is very telling. Obviously, there's more we can say. I mean, the question is, well, why didn't he go further then? But the bourgeois are not happy. They're not satisfied. They've wet their whistle, but they want more.
So just to comment on this, I think this is absolutely astounding that the bourgeoisie, after this budget, which everyone's seen what's in it, are not pleased, which tells us something about their thinking. They are stressed. They're panicking. I bet you there's panic discussions in corporate boardrooms across the country. I've seen some indication of that in the news here and there. They're getting out. Basically, it comes down to there's a crisis in the system globally, and they're losing. There's a big competition. There's protectionism everywhere, and the Canadian model was based on this relying on the American market. They can't do that anymore, and they're panicking, and they need something. They need a drastic change, and they need it really deep, and they need it quickly. And they need, what is that change? I guess, just to quote, you mentioned the Business Council of Canada, the president of that organization, which represents the top 150 CEOs in the country. The president, Goldie Hyder, said this. He said, Canada is experiencing an investment crisis, which is true. All the numbers across the board, both foreign investment and Canadian companies are capitalists have been sending their money elsewhere because they can't make profit or can't make enough profit investing in Canada. So he continues, Goldie Hyder says, while this budget makes moves in the right direction, it doesn't go far enough and fast enough to attract investment and strengthen competitiveness. So what that means, in a situation of crisis, what really happens is the claws of the system come out. All the nice things, all the nice class collaborationist things, that they put in place to satiate the workers have to be pulled away because capital can't afford it anymore, and they need to be competitive, They're competing with, look what Donald Trump's. I called this the big, beautiful budget because this is directly mirroring the big, beautiful bill and a lot of the things that Trump has done, which is lowering corporate taxes, slashing regulations, attacking the trade unions. Why? To make the American market more attractive to capital investment. This is really what the Canadian bourgeois wants. And actually, that's why they're unhappy, because it doesn't go far enough. As you said, it doesn't cut healthcare and education. And it doesn't, this is related to another thing, it doesn't address the situation with sufficiently address the situation with regulations. So many of the ruling class, many of the bourgeois were not happy when Mark Carney created this. What's it called? The projects office or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
They just wanted. They're like, why don't you just cut the regulations?
Mm-hmm.
They didn't cut the regulations. He created an office that could, like, basically find a way around regulations.
Mm-hmm.
But for the Canadian, not just Canadian, but any investor, you don't want to have to deal with a potentially complicated regulatory environment where you might get taxed a bit more, or there's a special rule where you can't invest. You have to jump through hoops. And in Canada, there's a lot of environmental regulation. And then on top of this, there's, I don't even know if I'd call it regulation. It's not regulation necessarily. Sometimes there is, but it's mostly the fact that there's Indigenous societies all across the country. And there's question of land claims. And there's this whole question that is not conducive to capital investment. If they're worried that they can't build a pipeline through some land, they can't build a road or a railway because there's over Indigenous land, they can't mine, et cetera, et cetera. So these are the big questions ultimately that the bourgeoisie want to settle. And that's also why I think you said it here, that they've put some hints in there, the collective bargaining, the privatization of airports, some things to kind of give an idea, to signal to them.
Yeah.
We'll go further. We're prepared to. But yeah, I do think, why didn't he? Mark Carney is a Goldman Sachs man, and he has surrounded himself with these types of people. It's not that they don't want to. I think they want to. And I think they see the need to. But there is a difference between the bourgeoisie themselves and the politicians, because the politicians need to get elected. And then I guess this is related to maybe the next point, which is this going to pass? Because the Liberal Party doesn't have a majority. They actually, up until recently, only had 169 seats, and they need, 172, I believe, to have a majority to pass it. And they're sitting there so they basically need to get the Bloc Québécois, the Conservative Party, or the NDP, or some of their people to break rank from them to support the budget. So, and yeah, if the budget was like a scorched earth type, decimate everything, it would create such anger in the population that no politician could possibly support it, or it'd be very difficult for them to do. So I think that helps to explain why he's balancing a bit, to not create a social explosion and to give some of the other parties, some of the other MPs, a reason to support the budget. But yeah, I don't know if you have anything to say about that.
Well, yeah, just what you're saying, it reminds me of a comment. I can't remember, it was maybe the commissioner of the European Union, one of these EU bureaucrats, who was talking about the situation in Europe, which I think, if people want to see where Canada's headed, I would say look to a country like France, look to a country like Germany, because what you're seeing in that country, in those countries, it's the same process. Like you said, the old benefits, the old welfare state, the capitalists can't afford that anymore. And that if they want to stay in business, if they want to stay competitive, they've got to destroy, what we call the social wage, which is things like healthcare, which is things like old age security, which is things like your pension. They have to destroy that to free up more money for tax cuts for the rich, for handouts for the rich, and so on and so forth. But doing it, saying it, are two entirely different things. And yeah, this comment, it was this EU bureaucrat who said, listen, essentially what we have is, we know exactly what we need to do from a capitalist standpoint. The trouble is getting reelected once we do it.
Yeah.
And that essentially sums it up in one sentence, that to carry through cuts on this scale, the scale that the bourgeois require in Canada, would be very politically challenging, and we'll talk about that, the Canadian context. But, Trotsky talked about how, the bourgeois need to, he said, restore the economic equilibrium. But the challenge is that by restoring the economic equilibrium, they destabilize what he called the political and social equilibrium. In other words, you can only go so far before you trigger an explosion in the working class or a political crisis like you're seeing in France, which I would say is a bit more advanced than Canada in terms of the crisis. But it gives you an idea of where a country like Canada is heading. And there are, so Carney is essentially playing a balancing act here. He also has to think about his own interests and his own position. And first and foremost, he needs to get this thing passed.
Yeah.
Because if it doesn't pass, then it's no good no good for the bourgeois. He needs to get the thing passed. And he's got a minority government right now. Now, seems like the Tories are going to oppose.
Yeah.
Seems like the Bloc is going to oppose. NDP, they've been very, very coy, I guess, about their... I mean, we'll talk about that in a moment.
Yeah.
But they need those NDP votes if this budget is going to pass. If Carney came all guns a-blazing with a Chrétien-level budget, cutting healthcare, cutting OAS, closing down hospitals, that would make it very, very difficult for those NDP MPs to vote for it. He'd have no chance to pass that budget. So there's a bit of political calculus that's being factored in here. You know, if he's not careful, the government will fall, essentially. So he's having to carry out this balancing act. And also, if he goes too far, you'll get explosions, because the one difference with Chrétien is that this is not the 90s anymore. You know, Chrétien carried out those cuts. People hated them and hated him. But you didn't see a big explosion.
There weren't people burning down Parliament
buildings
on the other side of the
Definitely
country,
not.
on this side of the world.
But it's also not the 90s anymore. It's a very different mood in society. And Carney's, he's not an idiot. He recognizes this. You know, these bankers, you know, a lot of times you say that they come to the same conclusions we do but from a different perspective.
Yeah.
In other words, you know, they understand the mood in society. But obviously they're looking for a very different outcome than we are. He recognizes this, and it's a balancing act that he's carrying out. But there's a limit to that balancing act. You can only maneuver so long.
Yeah. So, yeah, he needs votes. I can't remember the date this is being voted on. Do you remember? I think it's early next week.
Something like that.
Yeah, they have to debate it for a handful of days, and then it's early next week being voted on. And he needs the votes. So he's got one. I already hinted at that. He had this guy, Chris d'Entremont. I don't know if he's Francophone, but that's maybe how you pronounce his name. He's a Nova Scotia MP who crossed the floor to the Liberals. So, and there might be others. And apparently there are rumors that there are some people in the Conservative caucus that are not entirely happy with Pierre Poilievre, or maybe bending. I also think this helps understand why Carney's implemented some of the things he's done. He's done like a tough on crime bill, which is basically doing some things that the Conservative Party's been arguing for a long time. I think he's doing that because that question is important, especially in some constituencies. And he's bending to that. And then that would allow Conservative MPs to maybe signal to people, it's okay, I'm still conservative because I still have these ideas, you know? So yeah, he's trying to win them, obviously. But yeah, this thing about the NDP. The NDP was almost, we have to make this point, the NDP was almost wiped out last election. They were reduced to 7 seats, and they lost official party status. Why? Because as we covered in another podcast episode and articles on our website, because they had been propping up the Liberal government of Justin Trudeau as they funded a genocide, as the cost of living went through the roof. They were seen as complicit. And to be honest, they were complicit. And so people's anger was not necessarily misdirected. It was directed at the people that were making sure this bullshit was happening. So people were let down by the NDP. And so I think this is this milquetoast reformism, realistic pragmatism failing. And this is the context NDP finds itself with 7 seats. And you would think, I remember having a discussion a while ago about they can't support it. And then I started seeing the statements from Don Davies, the interim leader, and some of the MPs that are seemingly like on the fence.
Well, the statements were, well, first, never underestimate how low
Yeah.
the NDP leadership can go, because it's honestly embarrassing the kind of statements they made. Like, yeah, I mentioned to you earlier, but they interviewed Don Davies after the budget dropped,
Yeah.
head of the NDP caucus. And a reporter asked him a very simple question. Is this an austerity budget? If you're a left-winger, it should be a pretty simple answer. They're cutting 40,000
No, the government
federal jobs.
described it as an austerity budget. They
Yeah.
said it was austerity.
Yeah, Carney said it.
Yeah, yeah.
But then Don Davies said, not sure about. He said, it's hard to say. We got to take a look at it. Hard to say.
So he's more trying to defend the budget than
Yeah, then
or trying to claim that it's not an austerity budget. It's a progressive.
Yeah, well, it's like, it's putting lipstick on a pig.
Yeah.
Even more than Carney's doing. It's really embarrassing. You compare that to what, for example, the Bloc was saying. The Bloc's not a left-wing party. It's a nationalist party. But Yves Blanchette came out, same day, said, well, listen, he called it a red conservative budget that Harper would have signed off on. That's what the Bloc said.
That's true.
Yeah, and it's true.
Yeah.
He said they asked, and then they asked him, are any Bloc members going to cross to the Liberals after this conservative crossed? He said, listen, the Bloc is about as close to the Liberals as Quebec is to New Zealand, is what he said. Anyway, I mean, he's full of it. He's a politician. But NDP should be speaking that way. NDP is supposed to be the left-wing party, supposed to be the workers' party.
Here you have the biggest military spending since World War II, and you have 40,000 workers getting fired from PSAC, which I believe is affiliated to the NDP, and they can't even, they should be viciously denouncing this.
Mm-hmm.
But,
they're talking it up. Because, they asked him more questions, and they... he kind of soft-pedaled the military spending, the cuts, but he went out of his way, Don Davies, to talk about, but there's a lot of good things in the budget. Yeah. And I saw one interview where he's talking about, they're funding this cultural center for Filipinos in British Columbia. That's pretty good. Okay. We were asking for that. That's pretty good.
Yeah, the Liberals always do that. They'll have a couple things like that. I'm like, that's not a justification to defend a horrible budget like this. Yeah. It's crazy.
So that all leads me to believe they've already decided that they're going to pass this budget, the NDP. Either they're going to abstain, they probably won't vote in favor. That would maybe be too embarrassing. Although I will say that it does seem there's divisions as well in the NDP caucus. I think some have been a bit more opposed.
Yeah.
But again, you take a figure like Don Davies, they're clearly divided. But it seems that they're preparing people essentially to pass it through, make excuses. And the reason for that is completely opportunistic.
Yeah.
Because they don't want to stand in an election right now. Because, you mentioned they got wiped down to, was it 7 seats now?
7, yeah.
They can go lower than that. The party's broke. They're totally unpopular. They're connecting with absolutely nobody. And they're scared to stand in an election. So it's completely opportunistic and embarrassing, to be honest.
Yeah, to be frank, I think that it would be good if they just had an election without a real leader and it was more organic, because these people in control of the party, even when they have all the money in the damn world, they run an election with their reformist, milquetoast reformist ideas that don't appeal to anybody, and they just lose. So, but obviously that's not their calculation. They want a controlled campaign with a leader. They currently have a leadership race, so they want to wait. So it's but what does that prove to people? That proves that they don't care. Mm-hmm. They care more about themselves than anything else. And actually, that's usually what parliamentarians care about, their own jobs. Mm-hmm. So,
and also, just on that point, also this guy who crossed the floor.
Yeah.
You understand why people are so sick of these politicians, and why people say these politicians are all full of it. Because even this guy who crossed, the Conservatives were saying, listen, he was upset because apparently he wanted to get the deputy speaker position in the parliament.
Yeah.
And then the Conservatives decided it's not for you. He was pissed off about that. And apparently that's one of the reasons why he joined the Liberal Party. Completely petty, opportunistic stuff. But they're all
Sure.
like that.
Yeah.
That's why I wouldn't be surprised if you get a few more who cross, because these people have no principles.
Yeah.
If it's in their interest to join the government, they'll join the government. They have no principles. And people see this. This is why people are sick of politics, because they see this crap as these people stand for nothing.
So yeah, if the NDP votes in favor, they're done, man. I think they're totally useless. I mean, I think they've been useless for a while, but if the most likely option would be for them to abstain. Although you did mention division, I saw Jenny Kwan and Leah Gazan, both two NDP MPs, said they won't abstain. They won't even abstain because they don't want it to pass. They'll vote against it. So yeah, I know Don Davies said that they would all vote together. So I'm not sure how they're going to make that work. Maybe they split. That would be very unprecedented for them to split and not vote all the same way. But yeah, what's happening is that class pressure in society, the anger of the workers is clashing, and the radicalization of the youth is clashing with these parliamentarian opportunist needs of the bureaucracy and the parliamentary wing of the party. So yeah, we'll see what happens. But yeah, we don't know if this thing's going to pass because they're still missing 2 votes. They got to get it from somewhere. Maybe more people cross the floor, probably not from the Bloc, but maybe more from the Conservatives, or maybe some of the NDP people abstain. If that doesn't happen, it won't pass, which would be quite amusing, actually. You'd have a new election pretty quick. But yeah, I guess that's the long and short of it. I guess what's going to come next? So if it passes, I'm assuming it's going to pass. Something's going to happen. It's probably going to pass. Like we mentioned, the bourgeoisie, the ruling class, are not happy. They're not happy because there's not enough for them in there. There is, I will mention as a side point, there is a bunch of stuff. We call it the big beautiful budget for a reason, that include like tax breaks for companies, basically for manufacturers in particular, like write-offs for investments. If they build something, they get to write it off almost 100%. So, or the tax on it at least, just complete write-off. So yeah, that's a big gift to corporate Canada.
And it was copied from Trump's bill.
Yeah, it's completely
copied from
completely copied from Trump, which has been Carney's playbook on most things. So, but yeah, what's going to happen next? I guess the question is like, one, is this going to work? Because in the budget, if you listen to Dominic Champagne, he said this is going to canalize $1 trillion in investment. So maybe we can address that question. Is this going to save the Canadian economy and create, they said the strongest economy in the G7? Dominic Champagne even hinted that this is basically going to launch like a new post-war boom situation. So I think we can address, is that going to happen? And then, what's the next budget? Because they're only going to do budgets, I think, once a year. So the next one will be this time next year. I'm not sure if that's going to be tenable. They might have to do another one earlier. But I don't know if you have comments on this.
I mean, yeah, in terms of all these big promises, I mean, I'll say there's one thing I agree with, is when Carney said that it'll be the biggest transformation of Canada since the end of the Second World War. I actually agree with that, but maybe not in the way he intended. Yeah. I think, Canada will be transformed, is being transformed into a backwards country, to be honest. It's being transformed into a poor country. We're facing deindustrialization of entire cities across the country, a massive attack on living standards.
Gutting of good jobs.
Yeah, so it is being transformed, but it's not going to be a new post-war boom. It's going to be closer to the 1930s than it will be to the 1940s, the 1950s. So yeah, Canada is being transformed in a bad way. And yeah, these things like $500 billion in private investment, because that's what they say. and then 1 trillion of public and private
with the yeah.
together. But they said that this is going to entice investors. No one believes that. No one believes that. And if you look at the data, and I think you wrote an article on this for the new paper, the opposite is happening.
Yeah.
Money is flowing out of Canada at record numbers, not flowing in. And a few tinkerings with the tax code is not going to make the difference, is not going to lead to a new post-war boom. There were very, very specific reasons that allowed for that boom to take place after the end of the Second World War. The most important of which was a massive expansion of world trade across the globe. The world situation today is the opposite of that. That world trade is not growing anymore. Yeah. In fact, it's moving in the opposite direction. It's contracting. Yeah. Even a big economy like China, which was supposed to be, the savior, the saving grace of the world economy, is now beginning to slow down. The American economy, the same thing. So the prerequisite for a big boom are absent. And Canada in particular is not competitive. The capitalists are not competitive. They do not have a strong basis in industry. Yeah. It's in a very, very, very weak position. So this whole idea, it's very convenient. Oh, yeah, we get $500 billion worth of investment. Oh, then we don't have to make cuts. That would be fantastic. That would be very, very convenient.
Even if this does succeed in catalyzing investment to create new manufacturing or something, the big question here, it's related to why the post-war boom happened, is where are you going to sell it?
Yeah.
Because of World War II and the destruction, there was a mass destruction of capital goods, consumer goods, of the productive forces in terms of machinery and human life. There was a massive destruction. So that created the conditions for rebuilding and for a boom. And that was one of the main drivers of the post-war boom. It was that. Now, we don't have that situation right now. We have the exact opposite. You have a massive overproduction of commodities. That's actually why you have the trade war to begin with. Because it's companies or countries protecting their home market with tariffs. What's all the complaints? Chinese dumping. We got to protect against China. They're dumping steel and cars and electronics, and we can't, you can't buy one of their Huawei phones, right? Because that's bad. That's all about Chinese dumping. So there's a massive overproduction of goods. So that's actually explains why they don't want to invest. So I think even they could lower the corporate tax rate to nothing. They could eliminate regulations. They could do, and they might attract some investment in certain fields, like maybe in some mining, stuff like that. But it's going to be, I think, few and far between, because the big crisis globally is not in control. Like Mark Carney does not control that, and that's a fundamental factor.
And also on that point, just to make it a bit more concrete, where are they going to sell this stuff? Because they've been talking out, we'll partner with Europe. We'll do business with Europe.
Sure.
Europe is facing an even more serious economic crisis than Canada is right now. The German economy was until recently, it might still be in recession. France, we talked about, is facing a very deep economic and political crisis. There's no market there. There's a market, but if you're talking about completely reorienting your economy away from the United States towards Europe, that's the stuff of imagination. China, they talked about, and Trump wasn't happy about this, how Canada has a strategic partnership. That was the language that Anita Anand used. But if you sell to China, Trump's not going to be crazy about that. You sell to China, you get hit by the United States. And the same in reverse.
Well, that's the conditions in which they cut off the trade talks.
Yeah.
Canada's trying to find another trading partner here.
Yeah, but it's not going to happen. They have talks with India. Apparently they've been in talks with Saudi Arabia as well. But these are not going to replace the American market. Yeah. And the last figure was, I think it's 70 to 75% of exports go to the American market. You cannot snap your fingers and replace that, whether they like it or not. And I would say the serious bourgeois recognize this. They need to work with the U.S. bourgeois. Yeah. They cannot detach themselves from the U.S. bourgeois. So anything Trump says, whether they like it or not, they got to do it. That's why Carney, all this talk about elbows up and all this other, you know, hot air, promises that he made, it's all out the window. It's all out. It's been concession after concession, and they have to. What else are they going to
do? That's it. So they're in panic mode. They have to make concessions to America. They can't find a replacement. I was looking at you mentioned China and India. Canada is in a trade war with both China and India. They're getting tariffed. Agricultural products from Canada are tariffed by China and India, which are the two biggest, most populous countries in the world. So it's not just America. There's a trade world everywhere, or the trade war that's affecting the whole world. So yeah, this is the situation. So this is what makes it highly unlikely that they're launching a new post-war boom.
Yeah.
Actually, ruled out, I would say. Completely ruled out. They're not launching a new post-war boom. It's highly unlikely this is going to work. And the bourgeoisie know it. They know that. I actually have a quote from Theo Argytis from the Business Council of Canada, who said, "We live in a world where capital is becoming increasingly sparse." I think that's not true. There's lots of capital, but it doesn't want to invest. But he says, yeah, there's lots of competition for capital out there. So that's connected to everything we're saying, which helps explain some of the measures in the budget to try to attract it. I saw another thing where the John Graham, who's the chief executive of the Canadian Pension Plan, which is a big fund, it's almost $1 trillion. It's $730 billion. Funny enough, you know what? They're not invested in Canada.
Yeah.
12% is invested in Canada. The rest is invested mostly in America, but in other markets.
Which tells you a lot.
Yeah, it tells you a lot. And they asked him if he's going to shift the investments to Canada. He said, it depends. So much for Canadian nationalism. Yeah. And he said this about it. He said, capital is fluid and mercenary. It always goes where the opportunities of least resistance.
It's true.
It's true. That he's describing what capitalism is in its most basic essence, So I think this helps us understand what's going to come next. Why the bourgeoisie aren't entirely happy with this, the general economic problems that they're facing, and why what they need to do, I think, going forward. So I'm assuming the budget passes, probably. Something's going to happen. If it doesn't, we'll have another podcast next week and discuss what happens now. They'll have a new election. Something, we'll see. But I'm assuming it passes, in which case, what's coming next? What's the next budget going to be like?
It's going to be knives out. It's going to be knives out because, listen, the ruling class needs cuts. Yeah. They're not going to say it openly, but they don't want debt. The post-war boom part 2 is not going to happen. That's completely ruled out. How are they going to pay for this stuff? How are they going to pay for the handouts? How are they going to pay for the tax credits? They're going to have to cut mercilessly. Maybe not immediately. Maybe they can lean on the debt for a few more years. It's possible.
Yeah.
But eventually the axe is going to come down. And I use the analogy of Chrétien's first budget. Because a lot of people remember the 95 budget. That was
the big one.
The big one. He cut healthcare. He cut EI. He privatized anything he could get his hands on. It was a brutal, brutal budget. The worst in modern Canadian history, easily. But his first budget was much more modest when he came to power. He was much more cautious. There were some cuts sprinkled in there, but mostly the big cuts he avoided. Again, not because he was a good guy. He was worried of the consequences if he went too far, too fast. But the bourgeois weren't happy with that. Just like they're not happy with Carney right now. And they essentially said to him, listen, this is not enough. You still got a big deficit. This is not enough. You need to cut more. Then the next budget, the 95 budget, cut very deeply. That was hack and slash, the Chrétien we all remember. You could have a similar situation here. Feel it out, make some cuts, test the water, but eventually you got to go further. Eventually you have to go further. Because again, it's not a question of individuals, whether Carney or not, a good guy or not. It's a question of the logic of capitalism, right? They can compete on the market. They can't exist without the support of the state. That's another element. They can't, Remember they used to talk about the free market.
No.
They don't talk about that anymore because they can't exist without huge support from the
Yeah.
state. Huge support.
Corporate welfare, yeah.
Massive corporate welfare. Otherwise, they're going to get gobbled up by the Chinese, by the Americans. They need massive, massive support from the state. And the only way that can be paid for in the long run is massive cuts to the social wage, massive cuts to the working class. So maybe it doesn't happen tomorrow, maybe it doesn't happen next year, but that's what's coming eventually. And I think that's what people need to be prepared for.
Yeah.
Massive attacks are coming, and we got to be prepared.
So yeah, I think that sums it up. We are facing a situation. I think situations like this, and we're talking about of massive economic dislocation, of crisis, where things are shifting rapidly. This is where people get shaken, and they get shaken out of their apathy, or sometimes not even apathy, out of their previous way of looking at society. And Canada is one of those societies, this middle class, liberal, reformist sort of society where we don't have revolution, and the class struggle, it's within nice bounds, you know? We don't upset too many people with it. If you noticed already the last couple of years, that's been changing. We have some very militant strikes. Recently, we have the Alberta teachers strike, which was crushed by Daniel Smith. Their rights taken away, their collective bargaining rights actually completely taken away using the notwithstanding clause. You had the Air Canada flight attendants. This is just in the past few months that defied the law, then defeated that law that was put on them by the government. So yeah, we are already in many ways an epoch of class struggle, and this is going to be accelerated by this situation. We have to understand this discussion on the budget. It's not just some abstract thing about numbers. It's not an academic discussion. This thing is all going to have real consequences. And I think the backdrop of this is the massive problems in the world market right now. Actually, Canada is on the verge of a recession. And what you have right now is you have big problems in America. The GDP's been going up, but that's all based on what seems to be a speculative AI boom bubble that's about to burst. And that there's a lot of companies, banks that have been finding their ways around these banking regulations they put in after 2008. So there's a lot of funny money floating around in the market, and there's a big speculative bubble. So yes, I think the next budget, there's going to be a lot of pressure. Next year, there's going to be a lot of pressure on Carney, and he won't be able to choose. He'll have to move forward. He'll have to privatize the airports. He'll have to attack the unions. He'll have to do cuts to transfer payments for healthcare and education and other things. It will be much, much more brutal, and especially if there's an economic crisis. If there's the economy starts falling apart and it gets worse and worse, they'll be accelerating this, and they'll have the whole argument: oh, we can't afford it. Oh my God, we all got to do our part, you know. So yeah, we're here as the Revolutionary Communist Party to say we need to prepare for this. That the old Canada is dead. The old Canada is dead. This is a transformational budget. It is, as you said, as Marco said, to transform to make it worse. So yeah, we got to prepare. The only thing that's going to guarantee we protect anything that has made life bearable in Canada is our strength as working class people, is to fight. So yeah, we believe we need to revive the revolutionary traditions of the Canadian labor movement. Many of the unions were led by communists in the 1920s, to be honest. And the period we're entering is not dissimilar to the 1920s and 1930s. It's very similar, actually. So yeah, we need to prepare for that. In order to do that, we need to study Marxism. We need to study the ideas of the great class fighters, the great revolutionary communists that have come before us. And yes, many of them were Canadian. And we need to, teach wide layers of the population that are upset at this about those ideas so people can remember those traditions. So yeah, we can fight to have a positive alternative, to have a communist solution to the crisis of capitalism. And that's what we're doing here at the Revolutionary Communist Party. I hope you liked the podcast. We'll be producing more content. We'll have articles on our website on the budget, on the crisis in the Canadian economy, on what Carney's trying to do, and on many other things. You can go to marxist.ca to find it. And yeah, we'll have another podcast in the next week or two here on other things, so please stay tuned.